Hi, my name is Wynn,
My name is Emily.
And my name is Rachel.
and our group will be presenting Chapter 5 of the AP Research book, Writing a Research Proposal. Before we can begin writing a research proposal, we need to know exactly what a research proposal is and what it entails. The best way to know what something is to find the purpose of it. The purpose of a research proposal is to 1. Lay out the problem for research, 2. Describe exactly how the research will be conducted, and to outline in precise detail the resources the researcher will use to achieve the desired results. In this way, research proposals are similar to the blueprints, as you can see in the picture, for constructing a home. You cannot really start building the house without every detail in place and properly planned, or else it will just be a big jumbled mess and you won't know what you're doing. So the plan is essential to the actual research. In research, another purpose of it is that proposals are essential not only to the uses of the researcher, but also to organizations that need to approve research ethics and methods, such as the Internal Review Board, or IRB as we know it. A key note is that permission is essential to the plan. Before you start any of your research, you need to get permission to make sure that it's ethical and that the methods you use are okay and can help your research become valid. Thus, proposals may be used for seeking approval for dissertations or theses from faculty committees, reviewing ethics through committees or boards, seeking funding from corporations or business partners, and much more. In studying the characteristics of a research proposal, the 3 key characteristics are that a proposal is 1. A straightforward document, which means that you do not need to discuss or provide an introduction for why are you studying this topic. We don't want any extraneous or irrelevant material necessary. Just simply state what you intend to do in the near future in reference to your project, which means what are you going to do about the current problem in the future, which details your research. 2. A proposal is not a literary production. The goal is to communicate clearly, not to include complex characters or storylines to evoke certain emotions, etc. We're not trying to tell a story, we're trying to say specifically what your research entails. Finally, you want your research proposal to be clearly organized. We want to use a conventional prose style and label sections. And the number 1 tip is to be explicit. Where are the certain sections going and what are you saying in those sections? You need to be explicit in what you're saying at all times.
So as Wynn said, the research proposal should definitely be a straightforward document, but to make sure that you have these clear sections and you include everything that you need to make sure that your study is defined and very detailed, here's an example for organizing and writing a quantitative research proposal. It should first include the problem and setting. This would include A, stating the problem and subproblems. So every research project should have a main issue, that's the overarching problem with the thing that you're studying, and then you would have subproblems under this, which would add depth to your study. B, you should include hypotheses. C, define terms to make sure that your reader understands what you're talking about, even if they're not familiar with the topic. D, you should include assumptions. E, delimitations and limitations. And F, exigence. And this should not be too extensive. You just need to address briefly why the study is important in a larger social context. Second, you should include a literature review, which would include all the past research that you've done and thus why you need to study this. 3, data and data treatment, which means you need to include the data needed and the means of obtainment, which we covered in the research methodology video. B, methodology. C, treatment of data for each subproblem. 4, qualifications of researcher and the assistants. Obviously, as a high school student, you may not have as many qualifications as a degreed professional, but obviously you still have qualifications from doing research, having an expert, And 5, you should have an outline of your proposed study. 6, references, and 7, appendixes. For a qualitative research study, which is more subjective than a quantitative, which would be statistics, an example would be first an introduction, including the purpose of study, general background, guiding questions, delimitations and limitations, and exigence. This is pretty similar to the quantitative, but there are a few differences in the way that you would present them. Second, methodology, which includes your theoretical framework, the type of design and assumptions, the role of the researcher, the selection and description of the site and participants, which would obviously help you establish some validity and credibility in your study. E, data collection strategies. F, data analysis strategies. And G, methods of achieving validity. Third, you should include findings, which include the relationship to literature, theory, and practice. You want to make sure that your research is actually for a purpose and that your literature and theory and practice all connect together. Fourth, you should include a management plan, timeline, and feasibility. Fifth, references, and sixth, appendixes.
Yes.
When you format headings and subheadings in your research proposal, there are different levels that help you ensure that your paper is organized and tiered in the proper way where it makes sense to your reader. So this picture of the bears represents that you don't want to have everything clustered together. Obviously, space is important because you don't want to read a huge chunk of text, and it'll make it a lot more visually appealing to your reader if you have it spaced with the headings and spacers. So level 1 headings would be boldface, uppercase, and lowercase letters, as it says in the words level 1 headings. They should be centered on the page and be the largest organizational units. Examples of these would be titles of chapters in a proposal or research report. They should also be Roman numerals 1, 2, 3, etc. in an outline. Level 2 headings, on the other hand, would be boldface, uppercase, and lowercase letters, but they would be flush left. And on outline, they would be capital letters A, B, and C. Level 3 headings are boldface, first letter only uppercase, and end with a period. They're indented like a paragraph and would be numbers 1, 2, 3, etc. in an outline. So as the bullet on the right says, you may want to have an empty line between each heading and make sure to be consistent, otherwise your reader might get lost as they try to navigate throughout the paper. Level 4 headings are italicized boldface, first letter only uppercase. They end with a period and are indented. They would be placed at the beginning of the first paragraph in the section. They would be lowercase letters A, B, C, etc. in an outline. And then lastly, level 5 headings are italicized, non-boldface, first letter only uppercase. Essentially, they're not bold and only the first letter is uppercased, and they end with a period and are indented. It would be placed at the beginning of the first paragraph in the section and it would be numbers 1, 2, and 3, but with parentheses in an outline. Here's an example of all the headings that I just described. So the first level heading is in the center, and then as you can see, the second, third, fourth, fifth, they're more to the left, and then they go in and have less emphasis as you go down to the headings.
Now that we have talked about how to format our paper, let's go into the specifics of what we should keep in mind when writing our first draft of our proposal. First, we should always focus on organization and logical thought sequences rather than the wordings and grammars. In other words, we need to focus on the big picture rather than the details. Next, we should present the research problem at the very beginning and provide a context of the research problem so readers can understand why should the problem be investigated. We also need to include in the introductory discussions to convince the readers of the importance of the project and describe our proposed methodology with detail and precision by specifying sample, measurement instruments, and procedures. Next, we should always be using word processing software and adhere to any guidelines required by the institution to which we're submitting the proposal. By using certain headings, follow particular style manuals, and include certain information that the institution requires. We should always assume that readers know nothing about the proposed project and communicate in a way that shows our open mind about the outcome of our study. This can be done by avoiding words like I will show and I will prove that. And finally, if we intend to use data that already exist, we should include in the proposal where the data are located, how we're planning to obtain them, and how we will use the data to address a research problem, and how we intend to organize, analyze, and interpret the data. We should always utilize appendixes to present informed consent letters, specified measurement instruments, and other detailed materials.
So yay, now we have finished writing our first draft. But we are nowhere near from finished, as the next step is arguably the harder step, which is revising your proposal. In this book, we are given the helpful 12 points to revision, which I will be discussing. But first, we must remember that revisal is a natural and essential part of the writing process. Do anticipate that you will almost certainly need to write multiple drafts, so don't be discouraged if you're receiving a lot of feedback or noticing a lot of things you need to revise, because it's natural and essential. So beginning in the 12 points of revision, the first step is actually a bit surprising. You don't want to go straight into revising. You want to actually set the proposal aside, so just after you finish writing, just throw it aside and leave it alone for a few days. That way you can come back to revising in a new approach with kind of as clean of a slate as you can, and more of an objective lens than you would had you just started revising right after you wrote it. You can approach the draft with a new look when editing. The second step is to get a paper copy of it, print it out, and write all over it. You can use this helpful figure shown to see some of the editing marks that you can use to find where you need to work on. The third step is to carefully scrutinize what you have written, looking for disorganized thoughts, illogical thinking, and inconsistencies in terminology. A key note is to keep terminology and groups you are referring to consistent, as you don't want your reader to confuse between your experimental groups or anything like that. Next, look for places where you might be not as clear as you want to, as points of ambiguity are points of weakness. As you can see in the picture, you do not want a blurry vision of what your proposal is entailing and what your research is showing. You need to find where those blurry places are in your writing and clear them up. Fifth, keep your sentences simple and straightforward. You want to break those long, drawn-out thoughts into shorter sentences so they can be easily digested for the reader. Choose your words carefully. Again, using simple, short words are better for the audience to understand what you mean. You should only use professional jargon or jargon that is specifically related to your topic when it is absolutely essential. Next, check carefully for errors in grammar, punctuation, spelling, and formatting. This is pretty self-explanatory, but you don't want your paper to sound unprofessional at all. Another part of keeping things professional is making sure things are consistent. So again, going back to consistency, you want to make sure that items in bulleted lists are parallel in structure. So if you're listing things like definitions, you want to make sure you keep items and sequences in the same structure. So with definitions, you want to keep either short definitions or long complete sentences, but don't use a mixture of both when you're using them in a bulleted list. Next, make sure that there is a one-to-one correspondence between the citations in the text and the references in the reference list. This is very essential because in AP Seminar, we were marked down specifically if we didn't have a one-to-one correspondence, and that is essential in this research as well. You want to always cite and ensure everything you cite is used. The 10th step is to consider the feasibility of your project once again. You just want to check to be safe that after writing, you still think that your project is doable and feasible. The 11th step is to print out your second draft and read your proposal carefully once again. The last and probably the most important step is to seek the feedback of others and take it seriously when writing subsequent drafts. Remember that you can never truly be objective to your own writing, so feedback is super essential in getting really good feedback and revising your proposal. Feedback is the number one thing you should consider when revising your proposal.
Despite the efforts we put in to revise our proposals, many times the research proposals are still rejected, and we should continue to strengthen our proposal to avoid the following weaknesses. 1. The purpose of the research is unclear. 2. Problem is not empirically testable. 3. The problem is unlikely to yield new information. 4. Hypothesis is based on illogical reasoning or insufficient evidence. And 5. The problem is more complex than the researcher realizes.
Another category of weaknesses related to your proposal is in research design. The design could be unfocused, that the evaluation doesn't have worth. The design may not be ethical, so you need to make sure, especially to consider that one. The data could be difficult to obtain or inappropriate to the research. Sometimes research is lacking in controls, or the equipment you use is outdated. And sometimes statistical analysis is outdated or does not lead to clear results. These are all weaknesses related to research design that you need to keep in mind.
There also may be weaknesses in the investigator themselves in that they do not have enough experience, might be unfamiliar with the research problem, or have insufficient dedication to the project. For you specifically, you should definitely do enough research where you are familiar with the problem, and your dedication to the project should not simply be your AP score. You should have vested interest in the topic, which would be the reason that you picked it. There also might be weaknesses in resources, in that the proposed use of equipment or another resource is unrealistic, or the institutional setting is unsuitable for the research. Finally, there might be weaknesses in quality of writing. The proposal may not be focused on the topic. It might incorrectly cite sources, and it may have grammatical or spelling errors. Remember that once you have your final proposal, reread it again for these weaknesses. Some final thoughts about proposal writing are that, as a student, the advantages of the proposals are that it helps you organize your research activity. You don't have to think about it all in your head. It should not just be a brainstorm and you regurgitate a research paper. This helps you organize what you're doing along the way, and it helps communicate to your advisor your intent so that they can provide guidance in difficult areas. Most faculty advisors will want to review the thesis or dissertation proposal periodically as it is being developed, so make sure to update them with that so that they can address any issues that you may have along the way. Some characteristics is that you should have carefully chosen syntax, clear and concise style, attention to detail, and logical, clearly stated rationale. This kind of relates to AP Lang if you think about it, because you need to analyze every single part of your paper to make sure that it's as clear and as detailed purposefully as possible. Remember that your proposal is, quote, the practical application of your research competence laid bare on a sheet of paper. So as long as you follow all these guidelines and you get your revision and everything, you will get approved. So you got this, guys. Thank you.